Hello, everyone. My name is Dr. Sarah Chidiberejo. You're welcome to another conversation um, around the basic guide to doing research. I've done a couple of episodes, and they're all available on the Research Hub on this channel, Ellen Hub channel. I would like to invite you now, so please go ahead and subscribe if you haven't and engage with the platform. Remember, Ellen Hub is an online digital platform dedicated to the publication of news, current affairs, especially about Nigeria. But in addition to that, we carry out a couple of media related trainings, ICT trainings, and of course, we deeply embed ourselves in conversations around research just to wade into the conversations around education in the Nigerian space. My name is Dr. Sarah Chidiberejo. I'm a lecturer and the current head of department for Development Communication Studies in the Faculty of Communication and Media Studies, Rivers State University. So this particular episode is for my students that I'm supervising their project this year, my undergraduate students. And this session is just supposed to help them know how to package their research papers and dissertation for this year. So I'm providing guides just to remind them some of the things that they have discussed with myself and other lecturers in the past. This is time to put in the work, and I believe strongly that this will be really helpful to them, but not just to them, but for everyone who comes in contact with this content. So research is a fundamental part of our very existence. But in the world of academia, it is everything. And so here, I will share once again just a basic tip to putting together your research papers. So for my students, this is what I'm expecting. These are the sessions or sections of your work that I expect to find when you hand in your final document. And this is really, really important. It's really, really important that you follow the steps that I lay out here. And this is going to be a real summary because in the past, I have done the videos around writing in detail in chapters 1 to 3. The follow-up session and the follow-up sections in chapters 4 and 5, I will detail in subsequent videos. Okay, so in doing your work, I expect to find a chapter called the Introduction chapter. And you know what this means, right? It is where people come in contact with your work for the first time. So here is sort of a very broad summary of what we're going to find in terms of what your work is about, the problem you're about resolving, your research questions, and how you intend to go about them. And then you have the literature review, the methodology chapter, the data presentation and analysis, and discussion of findings chapter. And lastly, I hope to find in your document a conclusion. Okay, so for the introduction chapter, I hope to find in your work a background of the study where you lay out the basis for your work, a detailed section labeled the statement of the problem, the objectives of your study, your research questions, the significance of your study, in other words, the rationale why your work is important, and whose lives or what industries will be impacted by some of the things that you do. I also want to see a section labeled the scope of the study, how wide, how broad, the specific things you're doing, the specifics in terms of population, in terms of location. I hope to find all of this in this section. And then a little bit of an account of the limitations of your study. What are the challenges that you went through in terms of writing your work or that you're experiencing even as you carry out your research? And then finally, this chapter should contain operational definition of terms. How have you conceptualized the basic and key concepts that you're dealing with, the key talking points in your work? I want to see how you define them. So when somebody picks up your work, they are not misled. Words have multiple meanings. We want to know how you apply them in your work. I'll quickly go now to chapter 2, which is the literature review. So there are 3 main sections here. The first one is a theoretical review. What theories are guiding your work? Under what premises are you conducting your research? I also want to see a conceptual review. Once again, looking through the literature, what other people have done, how have they broadly defined the concepts within your work, and how have you been able to link every one of them per the problem you're planning to resolve in this research. I also want to see a detailed empirical review section. In other words, other works. Remember, when we do research, you're building on the shoulders of other giants. What have been said? What have been written about your research? And how are you making a difference? What gaps do you plan on filling? I want to see these three sections clearly laid out in your work. The methodology section is really, really important. I want to see, for instance, if you're going towards the quantitative tradition or the qualitative tradition, or you're blending both, in other words, mixed methods. It's really, really important that you lay it out here. I want to see your research design, the population of your study, a sampling technique that you applied, the description of data gathering instrument. I want to see how you're able to show me that your work is reliable. In other words, if someone else were to replicate your study, will they come to different findings? Will they come to similar findings? It's important in the context of research that will lay all of this out. Remember, I have a detailed video on how to tackle each of these sections. So please go through the Ellen Hub channel, visit in particular the Research Hub, and you'll find answers to all of these questions. This is basically a guide to the sections that I want to see in the document that you hand over at the end of the semester. Okay, so the last one is your method of data analysis. You've collected all this data. How are you going to make sense of it? What approaches, what methods are you applying? Remember, if you're doing a quantitative method, if you're adopting a quantitative approach to your research, it means that your data analysis method needs to be quantitative as well. The same thing applies to a qualitative-based research. Okay, the data presentation and analysis section and discussion of findings section is where the meat of the research is. So everything you do, of course, you have to adapt carefully to the traditions that you adopted, whether qualitative, quantitative, or mixed methods. I want to also see that you've paid attention to the kind of design that you adopted, and that inviting your piece or presenting your data for me to look through, that you've paid attention to these details. I'll do a broader video on how to present your chapters 4 and 5 subsequently. But for now, remember, there needs to be a section called Data Presentation Analysis and Discussion of Findings. And then on to the last chapter, which is called the conclusion. I haven't put a slide here, but remember there's a conclusion section, or the summary and recommendations, depending on the tradition that applies to your school. But with respect to my university, this chapter is called the summary, the conclusion, and the recommendation. In other words, I want to see here that you've summed up your work, you've tied up your work concisely. I want to see a restatement of your aim, your research questions, and then how you tackle them. What are the key findings? And based on these findings, what conclusion have you reached with respect to the problem that you tried to resolve, or the contributions you've made to literature? I want to also see you speak directly to the gap that you filled in the context of your research. I know that for undergraduate students, this may be a little bit intense, but I want to see students demonstrate the effort, because for most of our undergraduate students to go on to do a master's dissertation and a PhD, it's important that you begin to get used to some of these concepts and try your hands at applying them. They are not complex. If you give yourself the time and you put in the work, you see lots of examples online, offline, and of course you can come to my office anytime for the guide. Now, this section is really, really important. You need to pay attention. Your undergraduate project should not be less than 40 pages. So when you try to split this out, you see that, for instance, your introduction will be about 5 pages, and then your literature review, 10 pages. Your methods section should be around 5 pages, but your data presentation and analysis and discussion of findings should be a little bit more detailed, because that's where, of course, I want to see you shine through, use your own words to describe in detail some of the things that you found as a result of your work, and then pointing towards your conclusion, of course. So 15 pages should just be all right there. And then lastly, your conclusion. That's not to say if you present a work that's about 35 pages, it should be discarded. But when you bring a 20-page document to me, that's not acceptable. So think about the tag as 40 pages. For masters and dissertation, I would like to think about 80 to 120 as of details in the slide here. And then for PhD, it should definitely be above 250 pages. Okay. Remember, your work is not complete, or your document is not complete, except you include this particular section. So on completion of a document, I want to see a cover page, I want to see your title page, your abstract, your declaration, the certification, acknowledgement, dedication, table of contents, list of tables, list of figures if they're applying your work, and list of illustrations if you've included photographs, for instance. And then your document should also have the back matter, meaning references, really, really important. Every in-text citation you have applied should also have a detailed reference list. And of course, the appendices where any other document that you use, not referenced, or whether it's your data or your interview protocol, I want to see all of those also attached as part of your back matter. Your document for this year should be drafted and designed following the APA 7th edition. And we have talked about this. So if you've forgotten, please again go to the Ellen Hub website. You see how to reference using APA. And in fact, how to arrange the entire document using the APA style. That is the standard. Okay, I would like to thank you for listening. I hope that this video is not too long, but what have I done here? Just to share with my students and for everyone doing undergraduate research, some of the key sections that should be part of your work. Don't forget, you need to have an introduction, you need to have your literature review, your methodology section, your data presentation and analysis and discussion of findings. And then lastly, you need to have the conclusion. Depending on your school, sometimes it's called summary, conclusion, and recommendation, whatever applies. But for my students, I want to see that chapter called summary, conclusion, and recommendation. And of course, your front matter and your back matter. Thank you so much for listening. My name is Dr. Sarah Chidiberejo.